Good day, folks. This is the last video in this series before we close for business this year. I'm going to share with you some of the discussions that were had at the National Treasury meeting, just indicating what the kind of changes are that we could expect and what is being discussed. Certainly, like I've said before, we're not giving away any kind of secrets. These are not secret discussions, it's open discussions in the public domain. But it's always interesting to, if you haven't been party to that, to just get a sense of what is being discussed in terms of potential changes. First of all, it is minor changes that Annexure C deals with. So things like the potential increase in the VAT rate that was never discussed, wasn't on the table. High level technical adjustments that at the policy level. For example, how do we deal in future with cryptocurrencies? We've all seen this massive increase in the value of some of these cryptocurrencies and the Bitcoin specifically. How do we deal with that from that perspective? National Treasury is looking at that, but it's an issue that needs to be dealt with at the level of tax policy. So it's not part of this discussion. So just at a broad level to bring you up to speed with what the purpose of this discussion was. So one of the issues that they looked at is the export regulations with specific reference to what is meant by circumstances beyond the control of a person. Now they will look at, because it's very narrow at this stage, and sometimes there are circumstances that should be taken into account to grant relief under these regulations. They will look at extending some of that to include more circumstances than the very narrowly defined set of circumstances at this point in time. There was a long debate about the whole issue of apportionment. And what about the backdating of apportionment computations and apportionment methods? Now that debate will go on forever and a day. We all know it's because of the nature of the heatedness of that debate. It's far from settled in terms of what will happen there, but there is a push towards saying if SARS wants to change a method and approves a changed method, that should go back 5 years, because if the method is driven by business processes and the process hasn't changed, the method should also apply retrospective. But that debate will go on quite a while still. Then there have been discussions around incidental costs on entertainment incurred by airlines. So if your flight is late and the airline gives you a meal or the airline gives you overnight accommodation, that should be linked to the flight, the taxable flight, and the airline operator should get an input tax deduction in respect of those costs. And that is being discussed at the moment. It has been on the agenda for more than a year actually. Then car hire. When can we claim car hire? Generally speaking, you can't claim that on car hire, but what if you're away overnight, similar to the way overnight rule? And SARS is looking at that from the perspective of maybe extending that input tax deduction or exceptions to the input tax deduction. That if you're away overnight on business and you hire a car, that you would be entitled to claim that input tax deduction. Then there's some issues with unincorporated bodies. We've talked about this quite a bit in these videos. It's becoming more complicated because more and more businesses are being conducted in terms of joint ventures or quasi-partnerships and incommodate partnerships and so forth and so on. So it does become challenging more and more than it has in the past. So they will be looking at clarifying some of the issues around bodies of persons. Then there's been some discussions around reorganization, Section 825 of the VAT Act, the reference to going concerns in that section, and also the reference to Section 11(1)(e) going concerns. Now, SARS have confirmed in that discussion that they don't see those two as one and the same. Different rules apply to Section 825 than Section 11(1)(e), but we do need clarity as to what those rules are. Then there's been some discussion around the zero rating, certain zero rating provisions. At the moment, when a person imports goods and sells those goods in South Africa, in a bonded facility, a vendor in South Africa, that's a zero rated supply. But if that person sells those goods while the goods are still on the water but within the territorial waters of South Africa, that's a standard rated supply. Now, to overcome this difficulty, never intended probably that it should be that way, we have asked National Treasury to look at extending the zero rating to goods sold within the territorial waters, but before it's first cleared for a customs procedure in South Africa. The last topic we'll quickly touch on is VAT on irrecoverable debts. At the moment, there's a challenge in the VAT Act, in the sense that on the one side, if a person buys or sells goods, pays VAT to SARS and writes off a debt, then that person gets the VAT back that they've paid on that debt before. So they get a recovery of the VAT they've paid to SARS. If, however, that person subsequently recovers that debt, then you have to pay SARS what's due to them, and you pay the VAT that you've written off as a bad debt. If, however, you sell that debt to a third person, that's not the recovery of the debt. You haven't recovered your debt, you simply sold it. So there's no recovery of the debt which results in having to give back SARS's VAT. Well, the way the VAT Act is then written, if the person that buys the debt subsequently writes off that debt, that person also gets a deduction of bad debts to the extent that they've paid for that debt, if they've acquired that debt without recourse. So that's a effective way of, if you can continually selling your debts down the line to different people, you consistently get 14% back. You know, that's never what the VAT Act intended, or the legislator intended. Now, all we've said to SARS is, we think you should now sort this out. How will they sort this out? They will sort this out by changing the definition of face value, or introducing a definition of face value. So face value, in this case, will in future will mean face value is the amount that the original person has acquired the debt or as sold goods for, and the subsequent purchaser will be the face value will be the value of which that person purchased that debt. So that will sort out that problem. So that problem has always been there for a long time. It's now time to sort that out. So those are kind of the main things that's been discussed. Hopefully you will find that useful. From a TradeTaxPlus, hope you have a wonderful, restful period, and that you'll come back refreshed in 2018. But for us, this is the last time this year we're checking out for TradeTaxPlus. Chris Teron, TradeTaxPlus, Center of Excellence.